Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I'm Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm excited for our conversation with Deke Smith, Executive Director of the Academic Interoperability Council and soon to be participant of the ALN Higher Education Asset Leadership Board. We'll talk more about that coming up soon. Before we get underway, just want to thank our patron members. Their continued support is essential for programming like this, our newsletter, recent event at the National Academy of Sciences, and more. So thank you to all of our organizational members, and especially the Andrew James Advisory Group, this week's sponsor because of their upcoming ALN A55K professional certification course, and that starts October 24th. So if you're interested, reach out to anyone here at the ALN and we can get you signed up. And one more plug before we get underway, there's an upcoming Value and Benefits from Asset Management webinar, a continuation of that series with the Asset Management Council, our friends in Australia. As you can see, Richard Dietz, a recent feature of our event at the National Academies, will be speaking from the DC government strategic perspective, and Andrew McAlpine of TransGrid. So stay tuned for that. That's October 12th. And with that, I'll just say, if you're out there watching, we would love to hear from you. So please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat or use the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar. And Mike Bordenero, Executive Director of the ALN. Hello.
Thank you, Nick. How are things in Lander, Wyoming today?
Lovely, balmy.
Great. We're having a beautiful day in Chicago. Deke Smith is in Virginia, but he looks like he's in Ephesus with the Library of Ephesus on the island outside Turkey behind him. How you doing, Deke?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And before I ask you your background, I got to say my background with Deke is goes back a couple decades, and I met Deke when he was becoming the father of the BIM standard in the U.S. after he had already been the father of the CAD standard. And I'd like to tell the story that I know somebody who had an all pass to the Pentagon. But my biggest story I tell about Deke is I knew he was a good guy when he told me that he was volunteering to be the liaison between his church and the architect for a new building for his church. And I said, anybody who takes on that job is an absolute saint. So boom, didn't have to worry about whether Deke was the real deal or not after that. So we usually start by saying, how did you get where you're at in your asset management journey? But that would take the whole 30 minutes. So why don't you just start by telling us about how the Academic Interoperability Coalition. I knew it was a C word. Coalition got together.
Well, we started about 15 years ago, and it was just really as BIM was kind of starting to grow and things like that. It'd been around for a while and everything, but it just seemed like it wasn't really moving as fast as we'd like to see it. And so one of the things I identified is, we really need, and from a lot of other experiences too, we really need to get education at the base of it, because that's what it's all about. It's bringing not only, kids out of school, but also being able to bring practitioners, get them back into the continuing education to be able to understand what all the new technology and the nuances of that are in really moving a lot of these things forward. I think what I've come out of all of that is, and I guess just a little background, I've got both military, Department of Defense, as Mike said, so I'm managing 580,000 assets at DoD, but then also and all their software. We had 10,000 pieces of software that we're monitoring or managing, and then I've also at the lower end, not only the church, but also I've been running our neighborhood swimming pool for about 35 years. And interestingly enough, what's interesting about a lot of this in asset management is you can, whatever size portfolio you have, you can apply the same concepts. much more sophisticated, obviously at the higher end, but you can use the same concepts, even operating your own home for that matter.
I actually bring it in with people's personal life. That's how much of an asset management geek I am. When people are confused, I say, well, what is the organizational objective? What is your objective?
Yep.
And once they get their mission lined up, then I say, well, involve your relevant stakeholders. Who else do you want to get opinions from? Right now you're asking me, but, and if you follow the steps, it really works out really well.
Yep. Well, and I think the other thing is that whether or not the AEC, architects, engineers, contractors, and even operators, whether they're going to be able to make the changes necessary, or I think really, and what you really point out a lot too, and certainly the standard does, is it's the owners. They've got to start demanding it too. And because a lot of times I hear from the AEC community as well, nobody's asking me for it, so they don't do it. And so now, we almost heard that, Nick was on our AIC call yesterday, and we heard that also from the colleges and universities too, is that some of these changes we need to make to be able to support a life cycle really have to come from, somebody asking for us to change. And they're not going to be able to ask unless we've informed them as to what the question is.
Deke, we are the Asset Leadership Network for a reason. We aim to affect leaders because you're right, they need to be the ones putting the policies in place and kind of in charge of creating a culture at their organization.
Right.
Before we get into that side of things, I just had a quick question for you, because again, I'm not that familiar with your background. Would you call yourself an asset manager? How you said you've managed assets, but
I'm actually an architect by profession, but I also am an IT architect, so facility architect as well as an IT architect. One of my other jobs was one of the thread leads for the business enterprise architecture for the Department of Defense, which was when I was involved, we spent about $1 billion putting together an IT architecture in the 3 years that I was involved. And they've continued on since then. And that was back in 2009 or something like that. So, so it's been going for a while. But what that's also pointed out is that it's all about data. It's all about information, and it's all about understanding who the authoritative sources are for information and who are all the users of that information. And I think that kind of goes back to a little bit of what I said earlier. It's about the life cycle, and we don't do life cycle very well. And this is one of the things we found from education is that you can't get a PhD, for example, in a broad subject. You can get it in a very narrow subject. So we're training like we're gonna we're practicing like we're gonna play, and that's what we end up turning out, people that are in very much compartmentalized, and we talk about the silos and all those kind of things all the time. So I think that's one of the things that with asset management now you can start seeing across that whole spectrum, because it's usually the asset manager that is involved in that next facility that they're creating, as well as being able to operate and maintain the facilities that they already have, which is another side thing that I am involved in, is total cost of ownership. And all of these things kind of fit together because they're all oriented towards life cycle. And in all cases, we don't do life cycle well. One of the things we're trying to do with AIC too is create T-shaped practitioners. So T-shaped is, you have the depth of going down in the experience in your area of expertise, but you have also an understanding across the board. You understand, again, where that information is coming from and who all those people are that are going to need that information after you've done whatever you are doing to it.
So we are having you here because of your role in AIC, but also because the Asset Leadership Network is starting the ALN Higher Education Asset Leadership Board. And Nick is going to be the manager of that board. And it's going to initially have a two-prong objective. One is to create a template curriculum or syllabus or courses for universities around the world to be able to pick up and use. And then also we want to be able to serve the specific needs of higher education asset owners. That's a very specific language, so we will be able to tie in with that's another group that you're involved with APA. So there's many connections with Deke. But why don't we let you talk a little bit more about AIC, and then we'll see how ALN plugs into that.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to say. It's about 85 universities right now that are participating. We don't, obviously we don't get all those people on the line at every meeting or anything, but I do know that we record the meetings and make them available to people afterwards. You can go to our website, AICBIMED.com or org. And you can listen to some of the past meetings and things like that if you want. And we just had one on Tuesday, so that's already up posted and everything. And I think, and we've got a program this year that we've started to have some of the big names in education and all give a presentation on either what's happening at their school or what's happening with their organization and things like that. We've got Aeronautic coming from Stanford next time, and then I think might be the month after that we have Patrick McClamey, who's HOK. He's written a book about how he grew HOK, and we also have there's 5 of us that are been kind of leading this effort. Unfortunately, Glenda Mayo passed away recently, but she was
so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, no, it was really really unfortunate too, and because she was a big part of getting us all started, and what we've been working on for years is what we call the BIM body of knowledge, which we did through a Delphi process, and we went through and then validated it with the industry, a bunch of folks, leaders in the industry. And had that's been out there for almost 5 years, I guess now. And what we wanted, we then wrote a book to try to developing BIM talent is the name of the book. It's through Wiley, and that's available to kind of identify just what is the process that we have to go through. I might have mentioned also one of the reasons we kind of got started with this when I was on the staff at the National Institute of Building Sciences also, and there I did a project for the Department of Energy, and this is kind of a just something to keep in the back of your mind that with the Department of Energy there were somewhere like 80 different organizations that were providing accreditation for 5 different energy positions, BIM or energy manager, energy auditor, things like that. And the problem was that all these were out there. Neither the employer nor the employee knew which ones were good or bad or what otherwise. And it was very much like, there were some that were like getting a PhD over the internet for $10, but they were paying the full price, but they didn't know which ones were valid. And I see that proliferation because there is, sad to say, there's a lot of money in accreditation. So there's a lot of people that want to come out and get quick money. But in fact, what we did with this Department of Energy project was to go through and use an ISO process for education. I think, I can't remember the number of 14026 or 17025, whatever. Anyway, one of those numbers.
Yes.
Which goes through and identifies, how you do go through an education process and how you build firewalls and those kind of things. And we talk about that in the book too, is what that process is. But we went through this really exhaustive process to develop the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that go into the BOK. And so that we use that model because we had a lot of professionals that were involved, and there was a fair amount of money was spent. So we used that model to develop the BIM block for that we put together, and I think that's so we try to do a lot of these things on a shoestring. And as I say, going back to the business enterprise architecture issue, I don't know of anybody in the construction industry right now that can come up with $1 billion to help us develop an architecture. But that's really what we need. We need to understand who are the sources of data and where's all the data need to go to. And so that there's just all this, all this goes into the education process. And again, those T-shaped learners and the T-shaped practitioners. I guess one of the other things, going back to AIC a little bit, when we first started out, we were co-located with NIBS, and we'd take the Friday. They used to have their meetings on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We'd have our meeting on Friday, and that went along pretty well. We were kind of growing and getting more people involved and things like that. And typically, what we had is these practitioners or these educators present what they were doing and how they were changing, and we had Chuck Eastman and John Messner and all those guys. They've been involved for the beginning of all this too. And so we've seen some change. I think the concerns we have still are that you go to almost any university right now, and BIM will be in one of the schools, one of the colleges, but it won't be in the others. And even Patrick said this from Texas A&M on Tuesday, that he's looking around to see what kind of interaction there is between the colleges, and there is very little. And so we're not sure exactly why that is happening, other than the fact that the people that they bring in to teach the classes, that's their background is they'll come from the construction arena, or they'll come from design or whatever, and they're in one school. And typically what happens also is there's one class, there's a BIM class, and where it really needs to kind of be integrated into the whole process, just like asset management, you need to understand that through the whole process. And I think that's going to be, if we can crack that nut, we'll be in much better shape across the board.
Nick, you got any questions?
Just something you kind of briefly touched on, talking about the AIC meeting. You started a new meeting structure with this one that I attended on Tuesday.
Well, actually, it started the month before. We took the summer off because everybody was just tired, and everybody also disperses a lot in the summer. So we said, okay, let's kind of try to rethink a little bit, and that's why we came up with the idea of doing an actual program and having like say identifying somebody. And we've got the whole list on the on our website as to what's who's going to be presenting for the year, and then we'll break again in the next summer, and start up again the same thing. But like I say, we've been doing this. We've had monthly meetings up to this point, or until last summer, every month for 15 years. So that's been going pretty good for a while. But like I say, yeah, we have the first 20 minutes is dedicated to that presentation, and then a few minutes for questions, and then we have a business meeting, and then we open it up for discussion again for anything that the members want to talk about. And it's free. That's the other great thing about it, is you can't beat that. We do it at no cost, and the only thing typically we've been doing is charging for our symposium that we do every year. And we're trying to figure out whether it's time to start up our symposium again. We were going to do it last year with George Borkovich out in California, where they, he had his group, and Building Smart USA was there, and I think Building Smart Canada might have been involved also. We were supposed to be, and then we talked to our members, and what's happened in most cases is that the educators got their budgets taken away during COVID, and it's much harder to get a budget back than it is to take it away. And things really haven't changed that much for colleges and universities right now as far as funding. You know, they're struggling a little bit right now, getting everybody back into the classroom and all. So there's still some struggles out there, and we're not sure, you know, just whether the hybrid kind of approach or you know, like say partnering with somebody else is probably the right way to go. We did do it with AU one year, Autodesk University. And that worked out pretty well. We were trying to get some more people in were attending AU because it's such a big event. But people kind of felt, well, we really don't want to align with one vendor over another, because we are really, you know, agnostic as far as that goes.
So the similarities between what the AIC is doing with the subject of building information models and educating about that got a lot of parallels to what we're going to be facing with asset management. And we're going to have to figure out how to include a section on asset leadership, which, as Nick said earlier, we're beginning to really clearly see as the policy and the culture that only the leaders can establish. The vice president of facilities cannot change the legal contracting mechanisms. And one of the things that we're looking to is executive briefings. And we might be able to work with you to do executive briefings that show how all of this interdisciplinary approach could be useful.
Yeah, and I think the key there is keep it simple. You know, it can be a very complex subject, but at the same time, like say, managing our pool or working with the church and things like that, you can simplify it a lot and at least get people started. So that they can grow into it. I did a presentation recently, a couple times, I guess, in just talking about all the information that people already have that they're not necessarily taking advantage of. Because not only do you have the BIM information, but you've got your personnel information, you've got your accounting information, you know, your procurements and all those kind of things. And those are all things that you need to accumulate those costs. You know, to be able to you know, determine where things are going. And that's why I've also kind of got into this TCO aspect, because I do think that ultimately it's going to be the dollars that drive people to making the changes.
So the struggles are the same. So therefore, I think some of the solutions will be the same also, which is to have your presentations, which are success stories.
Right.
We received these benefits because we integrated these elements. And when we have multiple stories like that, we'll be able to show how the information that you're talking about in the building information model is an asset that needs to be managed just as much as the HVAC, the floors, the windows, the whole, other parts of the system.
And I think that's where digital twin kind of comes into play too, because I think people can kind of identify that that's a digital representation of their physical asset.
And something you said earlier, I didn't mention at the time, but you were saying everything's about data and information. And I was thinking, data, information, and then how you display it, the synthesis of that data, because I think big data and getting lots of numbers has been popular for a while now, but figuring out how to put that in a visual way, digital twin dashboard, something so that the leaders, as well as any users from the community or whatever, can the transparency of it and the ability to improve decision making.
Yeah, we did when I was with Army Research Lab in Delphi, we put together it was a CIOC, the Command Operations Infrastructure Center. I think it was. I might have gotten a couple of those letters wrong, but the concept was really, and it was primarily information related, but we managed we had I don't know, some 50 different video teleconferencing sites. And we managed all those from the point of view that we could monitor whether they were functioning. And if they weren't functioning, we could send somebody out to repair it. And it's the same, it was the same thing, our generators and power backups and all those kind of things. So we monitored all this from an operations center that ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that was, again, that was managing assets, in real time, and it was really kind of neat how we could, again, kind of predict when a problem was going to happen, so we could get out and repair it before the system went down or something like that. And that was kind of our goal, was to minimize downtime. And so that's downtime of people and downtime of equipment and everything else. So it was a good learning experience to show how these things actually can be put in play and function really well. I think one of the people that was really influential in some of the things that we've been doing too is Doug Christensen. He was at BYU. I don't know how many, I know Mike knew Doug, but unfortunately, and he was the one that kind of got us started on the whole TCO effort through APA, and developing that standard. And of course, they paid for the development of that standard, which is a great product that I think not too many people know about. And we're going to work on trying to get that out a little bit more too. But he implemented a lot of these concepts, a lot of these asset management concepts at BYU and their different campuses, and he demonstrated that it really worked very well. So we just need, like you said, we need some other examples of people that are taking that shot at it. And sadly, which is a frustrating thing, I don't understand why we don't have a lot of people really implementing the big picture. What we talk about with BIM is we have lonely BIM, where everybody's kind of doing their own thing in their own world, and again, as I said, information isn't flowing. They're doing it in design, or they're doing it in construction, or they create a digital twin after the fact and use it for operations. But it's there are typically 3 different models that people have created, and that's just not the way it's supposed to be. So that's where I say we kind of have a lot of work to do still to get where it could be. And there's all kinds of studies. They've been out for years and years and years of how much money we waste in the industry and all this, and for some reason that doesn't seem to affect anybody. I don't understand. A lot of these things I just don't understand.
Well, it's a messaging issue, and if we can help you with that, we would be glad to do that. And I think working together to create presentations that are there's only a certain number of higher education institutions in the US.
Right.
And, let's say it's 10,000. Let's target reaching 10,000 university administrators, presidents, whatever their title is. Yeah. And this is very exciting, Deke. And it is. We should have made an exception and made this an hour-long program. But part of the beauty of this is that we kind of have to condense it into this half-hour program. But let's let you have a final word before we let Nick sign out.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. It's going to be a team effort. We all have to pull in the same direction and tell them the same message. And I think with that, we'll definitely succeed. And it won't be quick, but it'll be. I think enough people now have dedicated enough time that we know that we have the stick-to-itiveness to make it happen. So hopefully that'll continue on with this process.
Well, Deke, I got to say that I was quite privileged to see you and Kimon Onuma receive your AI Fellows pins in the American Institute of Architects at Trinity Church in Boston.
That's right.
And it's been a pleasure to be working with you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Enjoyed having you there.
Okay, and we just want to again thank our patron members as well as other organizational members for their continued support of our programming, like this ALN Thursday at 3. And we want to point out the Andrew James Advisory Group is having another A55K professional certification course starting October 24th. So there's, last I heard, still a few seats available, and that's coming up. So please reach out if you're interested. And then next week, we'll have this value and benefits from asset management series continuation with Richard Dietz from the DC government and Andrew McAlpine from TransGrid. And with that, I will say thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.